Okay, 25 part 2. This is starting with the KKK is making its comeback during the 1920s during this whole hype against immigrants. Klan membership is going to hit about 5 million. They were protesting the new urban culture. They have a modern version of the Klan found in Stone Mountain in Georgia, Colonel William Simmons. They only allowed native-born white Gentile Americans into the quote-unquote invisible empire. They relieve anxiety over the changing society, express hate towards immigrants, Catholics, Jews, blacks. Different from the post-Civil War KKK, they were not just a racial but an un-American, anti-un-American activity group. So both of which were a threat. They got involved in beatings, floggings, burning people with acid, murder, kidnappings, lynching, setting fire to synagogues, Catholic churches, all activities that really became too extreme for some and will lead to their decline about 1930. So they had started out as an anti-black group, but adds to its list of don't likes to Catholics, Jews, communists, internationalists, revolutionists, bootleggers, gambling, adulterers, and people who use birth control. Immigration. In the 1920s, Congress will begin to restrict all immigration. They began to enact quotas. Nativism and immigration legislation. They reduced the number of immigrants allowed, afraid that when post-war Europe was looking for opportunity and place to move to, that they would flood to the United States. They start with the National Quota Act, limiting immigration from Europe, mostly gave preferential treatment to Great Britain, Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, enforced the racial bias in immigration. Mexican and Canadian immigrants, however, were exempt as they were desired for jobs. The Emergency Quota Act 1921 cut the number of immigrants to 3% of their nationality's population in the U.S. in 1910, and the 1924 Immigration Act cut it down to 2% of those groups to what the population was in 1890, so before many of the new immigrants had even arrived, and a lot of closed door to Japanese immigrants as well. First time since the Chinese Exclusion Act that more of the same kind of legislation had come out. Another big controversy was the fundamentalist controversy. Fundamentalism was stressing traditional Protestant orthodoxy, biblical literalism. They had their backing behind a Tennessee law that had said that you could not teach the theory of evolution in schools. And a teacher, John Scopes, a high school biology teacher, had violated that law to teach Darwin's evolution theory. The Scopes trial was about that case. Scopes monkey trial, as it's also known. Discredits of fundamentalism among intellectuals. William Jennings Bryan was leading the crusade against teaching the theory of evolution. He was the lawyer on the side for the fundamentalists, Clarence Darrow on the side for the defense. He makes Bryan look ridiculous. Scopes was found guilty but let off with a fine. Bryan dies a few days later, many say from the stress of it, and in reality, those traditional values were much stronger than ever. New aggressive fundamentalist sections of denominations, you have Church of Christ, Pentecostals, Jehovah's Witness. They believed in the literal reading of the Bible. Begins the Bible Belt in the South. John Dewey, education, learning by doing. So education theories, religious theories, all of them kind of becoming intertwined. Oops, I went too far. Politics in the 1920s, Republicans are going to become the dominant party. The urban wing of the Democrat Party emerges as the most powerful force. Against that, the Republicans are going to have the White House from 1921 to 1933. And Republicans use this power to stop more reform legislation and build a relationship between business and government. And Democrats kind of start to split between rural Democrats and urban Democrats. Warren G. Harding, seen as handsome, well-liked. Really, in politics, he does little more than sign bills into law until he randomly dies in 1923, most of the way through his term. After he dies, a scandal comes out that had involved his Secretary of the Interior and Attorney General, that they were corrupt and led a bad reputation for his administration, involved in corrupt land sales. Teapot Dome scandal is how it's known, mostly because a lot of the land sales happened in Teapot Dome, Wyoming, and then some in California as well. All right, Calvin Coolidge was the one who comes in after him. He was honest, reassuring after Harding's death and the scandal that came out, and he just really wanted to govern America and let it go about its business. He didn't want to change anything, just, believed that everything is working fine, and so we're just going to leave it as is. And so just said, you know what, keep going about your business. I'm not going to change anything. Hoover comes in. He was a self-made man, had gone from orphan to Stanford, directed Wilson's Food Administration in World War I, seized business in America as partners, really believed that we were getting close to triumphing poverty, and then, of course, the Great Depression is going to hit, so it's going to kind of unravel that theory. Republicans' policies in general at this point was a return to normalcy. They wanted to go back to not heroism, but back to traditional policies. No more of the zealous reformers. Back to things like McKinley era of doing things with a high tariff and tax policy, or high tariffs. So they started out with the Fording-McCumber tariff. 1922, they're going to cut income taxes, especially for the extremely wealthy. JP Morgan actually never had to pay income taxes during the Depression. Farmers are suffering from lower prices and overproduction, but Coolidge does not want to get involved. He sees that as an unnecessary interference. It was going to have more expansion of federal bureaucracy, however, with more departments, creating new bureaus to help with efficiency in managing overall affairs. And then Democrats, like I said, are divided between the rural Democrats and the new urban Democrats. The traditional ones are prohibitionists, fundamentalists. Some of them are the Klan members and the rural counterattack on the city. New Democrats, appealing to the immigrants in the city, they oppose prohibition, had very little in common with the rural Democrats, really identifying themselves away from Republicans and run under a more progressive title in 1924's election, even though they don't get the presidency then. The 1928 election, Hoover wins over Smith. Really, the main issue was going to be religion, because Smith was a Roman Catholic, and that's what a lot of people are going to associate with immigrants, and so they're going to bypass Smith, go for Hoover, and religion was the big deciding issue for that. And then two opposing views of the 20s. Some see it as Depression ends the spirit of the 20s and this spirit of indulgence, and then some of them see it as it lays the foundations for modern America, because we do see a lot of parallels between the 20s and how things are going to operate and run in later decades.